With the NHL Draft right around the corner, the Blues have a couple limited but key decisions to make regarding the future of the organization. The Blues hold the 19th overall pick as well as a 5th and a 6th round pick after that. They do not have a lot of draft capital this year, so is there a possibility we see their strategy pivot? And where could they go at pick 19? We've got all of that and more today on this episode of Note News. Welcome in to this episode of Note News. Thanks for tuning in. I am Alec. John couldn't make it this week, so I'm doing a solo episode. And it's time to talk draft, which is normally one of my favorite days of the year. It's a very fun time where hope springs eternal and optimism is on the rise, of course. So if you're tuning in and you like blues content or draft content or everything, I'd like to thank you. You go ahead and like this video, subscribe, all that fun stuff, because it really does help us grow the channel and spread to as many blues fans as possible. We want to make a really strong community like the one we've already got going. And thank you for tuning in today. So let's get into draft talk. So the Blues hold the 19th overall pick in the 2025 NHL Draft. This draft is characterized for being a very low upside draft, or the other way to say that would be it's not as strong as a normal year. And there's not a ton of options for the Blues or for any team picking outside the top 4 to 6 for a real NHL star, most likely. There will always be players who surprise, but coming into the draft, most of these players are going to be depth contributors that you select in any round if they can make the NHL. Another thing is there are not a ton of defensive options where the Blues are picking. The defense prospect pool is definitely still a need. We'll get into needs here in a second. And it seems to be the one that I get here talked about the most, just about how old the defense is, how much it needs to retool. You've got guys like Udacek and Lindstein coming up, but like behind them, is there anything else? And where the Blues are picking, they might not have the option depending on how the board falls. However, another thing about this draft is that the board is kind of really hard to predict. Even there is a consensus top 4, and even then, there's a lot of buzz about the fact that it's probably not going to go in an order within that top 4. So it's really hard to know who is going to be available, especially all the way back at pick 19 where the Blues are selecting. So it is going to be a very on the fly type of draft, but I suppose that is the job of a general manager, is to adapt to situations like that. And if anybody has a track record for having successful draft history, Doug Armstrong has had some masterful drafts in his time. I know we talked about, quick sidebar, I know we talked about perhaps last season being Doug Armstrong's best season or one of his best seasons. If you include draft in those, in that like full season evaluation, I think there's a lot of really, really good seasons out there for Army, and some drafts he really killed, especially when he came into the league. But anyways, pivoting back to the draft now, the other thing about this draft is that the caliber of player is just sort of similar to the prospect system that we have right now. So the way that I talk about prospects is you have your tier 1 prospects. These are guaranteed NHLers with superstar upside. This is like a Macklin Celebrini, a Connor Bedard. This is also, or this is like the guaranteed going to be great in the NHL type of prospect. Very, very limited. Tier 2 is like that definite NHLer with a chance to elevate, but probably, or maybe not definite NHLer, but tier 2 is like a very likely NHLer. To me, this is something like a Dalibor Dvorsky or Jimmy Snuggerud, who should make the NHL and have a chance to be really good, but probably more likely will just be like good contributors and not like, top 50 players in the league. But they definitely have a chance to. And you could argue that Snuggerud and Dvorsky should be in that tier one. And I honestly, I would hear that argument. So maybe a better example would be like, I would say like a Zach Bolduc probably, or to use an NHL equivalent, like a Cutter Gauthier would be a good tier two guy of like should be an NHLer and could become something really good, but and there is at least maybe a floor of falling off too. Tier 3 is sort of just like lottery tickets that like are probably going to be your bottom sixers, probably going to be your bottom pair, third pair defensemen, probably going to be your backup goalies. That if you get anything more than that, that's awesome, and they could be like a wild card, but most likely their ceiling, their upside is limited to and this would be like a Torpchenko or pretty much everyone on the bottom six already, like um, Tyler Tucker, I would say is right now maybe a tier three, but he might be becoming a tier two guy because he had a really really good season. He looked really good, but I would say this is like I would say this is our the majority of our prospects, like a Stancil, a Yeko. Um, I would personally put Stenberg in this range, but I could see an argument for tier two for Stenberg. Nikita Alexandrov, like Kaskamaki, Pekarchik. These are all tier three guys that are sort of like wild cards, and you hope, one or two or multiple of them can hit, but expecting anything from like a Uri Pekarchik, like expecting him to be a 40, 50 point plus player is kind of asking for a lot. So this is more like that bottom six contributor or that third pair contributor. And then tier four is just like probably not going to make the NHL. Maybe as a chance to, but this might be a um, Andre Koss or um, I mean, I guess Corey Schwinneman did make the NHL, but you get it, I think. So that's when I say the tiers, I just want to explain to people what that means so that we're all on the same page here. But to get back to the 2025 NHL draft, my point was that they have a lot the options, especially in the first round, are going to be a lot of tier three guys. And the Blues system right now is loaded with tier three guys, which is a good thing. It's a very good thing to have organizational depth like that. But you're not necessarily strengthening your system. You're mostly just adding to its depth. If you want to talk about like the types of player that you can get, perhaps you could get more lottery tickets there of more snipers or more power forwards or whatever, but most likely it's really only adding to the depth and not really elevating the ceiling of what your prospect system can do. And of course, all of this could be like you could always get that player who shoots up the prospect rankings, who has a crazy year after they get drafted, who becomes more than what we thought they were. But to expect that is to expect failure, and we're talking at this point in time how things look for the draft, not necessarily how they could look if in a best case scenario. This is much more like a 50th percentile outcome for these guys that we're talking about. So let's get into the draft strategies. So looking at what the Blues need right now, I would say there's two pretty big glaring needs. And I would say that's defensemen, specifically right defenseman, like a left-handed shot defenseman, but really any defenseman could help just because their core is so old and they really only have like Yitzchak who might be good, but the jury's still kind of out on him. And then Lindstein, who is pretty much like Tyler Tucker or like a 70% of Colton Parayko, which is very good. Like, he's very much will be in the NHL. I just don't think Lindstein is going to be much of like a star. But even beyond that, they just don't really have bodies in their prospect pool. Like, you have tier 3 or tier 4 guys like Quentin Burns, Michael Buchinger, Lucas Fisher, but those are all like shrug. I don't know. there's there's not much you can expect from those names, and maybe one of them goes out and has a great year this year, and they could elevate themselves into being sort of towards the top of tier 3. But right now, it's not looking great behind Lindstein. And so the other need for the Blues, and I would argue that this is their most pressing need, is center. The Blues, simply put, do not have center depth in their system at all. You have Dalibor Dvorsky, who's a very, very good center, tier 2 guy. Again, could say he's tier 1, but I tend to take the more conservative estimate on prospects. Tier 2 guy and should be a middle six center, probably. I don't really see Dvorsky being a fourth line center, so should be a middle six center in his career. And behind him, you have Zach Dean, who was acquired in the Ivan Barbashev trade for from Vegas, who is going to be 23, hasn't really had a shot in the NHL yet, and has been getting slightly worse in years previous. So Zach Dean is kind of in a make or break year for him, and even then, his upside is arguably 4C. So that's your number 2 option. And then number 3 would be like maybe Yeko or Kaskamaki, but Yeko doesn't really play center. And Kaskamaki is a good playmaker. He would and probably will be a fun fourth line center if he makes the NHL. But again, these are like depth pieces we're talking about here. So the Blues don't really have center depth at all, and building up the middle is obviously a very beneficial way to go about things in the NHL. When you look at the successful teams right now, they pretty much without fail all have great center core. And the Blues, it's kind of coming back to bite them right now. I mean, the talk of the offseason is that Braden Shen isn't enough at 2C and they need an upgrade. And so that's more indicative of why I think center might be the way that they go. And center might be the right way to go because you just don't have a lot of bodies there. But beyond just the defense, where they also don't have a lot of bodies, there's at least some names. Beyond Dvorsky, there's really not much. And Dvorsky is like knocking on the door of the NHL. So that is about to exit your prospect pool. So after Dvorsky exits, if they don't take a center in this year's draft with their 3 picks, they will not have a center in their system, basically. And that is really, really bad to not have a position as crucial as center. So I expect them to, at least with one of their picks, address this and take a center, because that would be a pretty desperate situation to be in, or even potentially trading for center prospects. But then you're really getting into desperation mode. And I think that is a big part of this discussion is the draft capital that they have this year. It is not much. It is very, very little. And I don't expect them to, I guess we'll talk about if they could increase their draft capital at all or decrease it potentially. But before we get into that, just um, I they don't have a lot of picks here, so it's not like you can go about addressing so many needs. You can really address one thing and then probably get a third guy to address the other thing. There's not a lot of options for the Blues here, and that's again not a terrible situation to be in, especially in kind of a weaker draft. That's actually pretty fortunate, I would say, but there isn't an opportunity to essentially have a, you know, I mean, there's an opportunity to have a legacy-defining great draft if you get 3 NHL players, but there isn't an opportunity to greatly overhaul the state of your prospect system as it currently stands, and I think that's the biggest thing that is giving me pause about this year's NHL draft, is just how are they going to go about addressing so many needs, um, when, yeah, there's just not a lot of options. So, now let's get into potential strategies of draft day. And the first one that I want to talk about is I feel like the one that most people are picking or going to. Should they trade the pick? Should they trade their first round pick for a player as part of a package? And I think this is definitely an enticing option. I mean, we discussed on a previous episode the potential of Marco Rossi for that pick, plus other pieces. But getting someone like a young player of the caliber of a Marco Rossi would definitely set this Blues team up forward. And I don't want to go into this too much because we really already did on that episode. I believe it was 84, but you can head on over to our channel page and figure it out there. Excuse me. Um, it really does make a lot of sense for a lot of reasons to trade their first round pick for a player, especially a young player with potential, because with that pick, you're probably not going to draft someone of that caliber. So if you don't have to give up too much else with it, then I think that'd be a really wise and prudent strategy to go after somebody else that is on their board that is, knocking on the doors of the NHL, so that can fit with our timeline of Holloway and Broberg and Neighbors and Bolduc, etc. Um, and it would make a lot of sense. Doug Armstrong has done so before. The year he acquired Ryan O'Reilly, is he going to acquire another Conn Smythe winner? I mean, gee, I sure hope so, but I'm not sure that's not necessarily what I'm projecting here. But I do think it probably, because at the time, O'Reilly was a different age range than what we're looking at. Probably we're looking to build more for the future here and acquire a younger forward who still needs a little bit of development. But it would make a lot of sense. And like I said, check out all of our thoughts in that previous episode. Another option that I think isn't really getting talked about, but I could see being very, very likely, is if they actually trade back in the draft. With that first round pick, depending on where the Blues have these players evaluated, it might be kind of a push between picking at 19th overall and picking at, say, 38th overall or 50th overall or somewhere in that second round. Um, the caliber of prospect is just a lot of lottery ticket tier 3, tier 4 guys at that point, both in the first and second rounds, and even into the third round, I'd say too. So could they trade back, get more picks to have a little bit better of a chance to overhaul the prospect pool? Definitely. And I think that would be a good strategy too. I think that would really be a very interesting way to approach the draft. Give someone else the first round pick, get capital back for it, get a second, get a third, and now you've got 4 picks instead of 3, all about the same caliber of prospect. I mean, that just feels like a very efficient use of resources. So, for that reason, I'm interested in trading back the pick and seeing um, what they could get from another team. Now, who exactly another team would be targeting there, which is sort of what we'll get into now with some names. That is up to the question, but maybe there's someone that a team really likes, or maybe it's like someone is ready to pull the trigger on a Joshua Ravensbergen. But let's now pivot and get into if they stick and pick. So we've discussed if they trade their pick if they trade their first round pick, I should say. This is for the first round only. I'm sorry, I don't do draft evaluations into the 5th and 6th rounds. That's just asking a little bit much. But this is discussing if they trade their first round pick, um, or if they trade back into later rounds of the draft. I think those strategies we just discussed. Now let's get into if they, as I said, stick and pick. So There are some options here. Again, it all depends on how the board falls. So I'm going to take more of a breadth approach than a depth approach. Um, and what I mean by that is I'm not going to be giving full 30-minute scouting profiles on all of these guys because we have like something like 10 names here. And so that would be just a little bit too much content for us to produce. Um, but I do want to get into some of the options that they have to discuss what what could a first round pick be for the Blues, and I'll start where I left off actually with that. Who could be trading up? Joshua Ravensbergen is the projected first goalie to go in this draft, and is a projected first round pick. He's really got a high ceiling as a goalie, with a chance to be a number one. His floor is still probably a backup, so this is sort of like a Joel Hofer type guy. Um, would the Blues go somewhere? Oh, I should also mention he is 6'5" as well, so this is really like Joel Hofer, basically again. Would the Blues go somewhere? Would the Blues go goalie on their board? It would be quite the reach, again, just given the lack of depth at other more important positions in their prospect pool. That would be pretty shocking, I think, if they picked Ravensbergen, but I mean, I guess there's always a chance, and you just get the best goalie in the draft, and your goalie pipeline is honestly, if they sign Hofer this year, just thinking about how the timelines match up, Binnington's contract ends. I think he gets another, but just say he doesn't, Hofer takes over. You've got Colton Ellis, or by then Ravensbergen will be ready to be a backup, and then the pipeline just keeps flowing. So I see the reasoning, but also I would be pretty surprised if they went that way. So now I want to get into some centers. As I said, this is the best or the biggest need for the draft for the Blues prospect pool. And I think the player that has my eye maybe the most, but I don't know if he's going to be there at 19, is Cole Reshney. Cole Reshney is a center who really likes to create. He's a playmaker and is really a great teammate on the ice. Off the ice, I have no idea. Again, sorry, I couldn't get into it quite that much, but this last year played in on the Canada U18 team and had 7 points in 5 games, 3 goals, 4 assists. I would expect him to profile as like a potentially middle or maybe bottom six center, probably like a third line playmaking center with real offensive upside. Again, I don't know that he'll be there at 19. I would be a little bit surprised if he was, but it's worth mentioning that if he's there, this should be their guy most likely, and it would be a fun pick. Another guy who could be there, who I think is probably at least a 50% chance um, to be selected by the Blues, is another center, Braden Coots. One thing I'll say about this draft, there are actually quite a number of centers, which is why perhaps that they don't go as far, but potentially that logic reverses the other way, and everyone wants a center, so they're all gone by 19. But anyways, Braden Coots is very much a first round caliber player. Last year played in the WHL for the Seattle Thunderbirds, scored 63 points in 60 games. Coots is a strong two-way forward who really likes to use his defense to beget his offense, basically, and it seems like he likes to throw hits and play physical too. So this is sort of a player with a power profile, who's pretty good defensively and offensively, has some upside. Again, probably to be like a third line center or something. So Cole Reshny, Braden Coots are two names that I'm definitely keeping my eyes on draft night to see if they could fall to 19. And if either one of them is there, without a doubt, that's the pick I would make. One more center name I want to go over is Malcolm Spence. So Spence played last year at the university, or sorry, he's going to be playing in the University of Michigan, but it played last year at the Erie Otters of the OHL. 73 points in 65 games in the OHL. That's pretty good, but definitely this is another hard-hitting, heavy, physical guy who could play center. Also has played some wing. But I think he could play center. I mean, he's strong and is good hand-eye with his stick, but he is really smart. He really knows how to manipulate the ice, and he really uses that to his benefit, especially on defense. It's sort of like that Philip Broberg approach where he knows like where to be to break up the play, or where to be to yeah, to make a play. Um, Perhaps he is more of a winger, which is maybe why you would want to stay away from a Malcolm Spence. But again, I think the upside is there for him to be like a 3 or 4C. And then last forward we'll talk about here is Jack Nesbitt. Nesbitt should be there by 19. He shouldn't be chosen yet, and he is. The thing with Nesbitt is he is 6'4", and that's kind of the draft profile. He's 6'4", has a big body, has huge length, and uses it to defend really, really well. Last year in the OHL, had 64 points in 65 games, so decent-ish. But this is probably a 4C, a defensive 4C, who's a massive body. You know, imagine if, well, Nesbitt doesn't really have the skill of Toropchenko, but um, that's kind of the frame we're talking about here. So those are four options at forward the Blues could look at. Again, you've got Cole Reshny, Braden Coots. If those two are there at 19, definitely going with them. Malcolm Spence could be a good two-way forward option, and then Jack Nesbitt is another center option, who is probably more of a defensive guy. Now, let's pivot to the last position group, which is the defense. So, as I said, there's a lot of centers in this draft. The defensive core, it depends who you ask. Some would say it is really deep, and there are a lot of options. Others would say there's only some names that are actually like worthwhile options. I'm probably more in the latter group, but there's a chance that there's a lot of really there's a chance that one of these or a couple of these lottery prospect defensemen are the one to pick, and you know maybe you want your guy at that spot. So let's just get into the names here. The first is Kashan Aitchison, who is a very, very high character guy. He's a mobile puck mover. He's also kind of just he's Kashan is kind of just a classic defenseman. He doesn't really do a lot of very flashy things. He's just very solid. He's solid across the board and should be an NHL player most likely. Should be a third pair defenseman. And I think that's the profile on him is that he is a very simple prospect. He's defensive, he plays smart, he doesn't really make a lot of high upside plays, and as a defenseman, that can be fine, especially on in your bottom four. So Sean Aitchison could be taken by 19. Again, it really depends on how the board falls. Most of the mock drafts do have him gone, which I'm a little bit surprised to see that. I'm perhaps not as high on this guy, but a name worth discussing. Another name that's probably going to be gone by the time the Blues are picking but is definitely someone I would keep my eye on, is Jackson Smith. Smith is a very big defenseman, 6'3", and 190 pounds, and he is a heavy hitter who is a great passer too. Jackson Smith plays a physically intense game, using his body on defense, and really likes to get activated offensively too. Last year in the WHL had 54 points in 68 games with 43 assists. So this is a defenseman who really likes to help out on offense and is 6'3". That's a interesting profile. I think he'll be gone though. But Jackson Smith is a name I like, and I would be very happy if the Blues were able to get their hands on, if they didn't have to give up, if they traded up to get him, if they didn't have to give up too much. But definitely an intriguing name. Next, we'll go to Cameron Reed. Cameron Reed should be there at the Blues pick for the most part, and he is a a sort of a shifty trickster at defenseman. Likes to do a lot of creative stuff to mixed effect. Last year in the OHL had 54 points in 67 games, pretty good. Was plus 39 on the year. I do think that projecting his defense to the next level could be a little bit difficult. I'm just not sure if his style of play, that's sort of boom or bust, it would translate, but his offense definitely will. I project him as more of an offensive defenseman. And I think in terms of offensive creativity and flashiness, I mean, this is a guy who, like, I'm not saying at all that he's going to get to this level, but he sort of plays like bargain bin Lane Hudson. So obviously just won the Calder. That's a pretty good name to model your game after, even if it's in sheltered minutes. So that's Cameron Reed. Another defenseman who I think should be available is Blake Fiddler. Blake Fiddler is a 6'4", 209 defenseman, so another really, really big body, and is more of a defensive skater. He's really a smooth skater, really knows how to, again, use his body, a very smart defenseman. This is pretty similar to Kashawn Aitchison, but just with perhaps less offensive upside. So this is bargain bin Kashawn Aitchison, who I'm already not as high on, but that isn't to say Blake Fiddler just isn't worth first round pick. You could be getting like a like a John Klingberg here. Like this could be a seriously impactful defender. So there is genuine ability here. It's just, yeah, not necessarily the most exciting player. And the last name I have on my list here is Logan Hensler. Logan Hensler just finished playing for the University of Wisconsin. Had 12 points in 32 games, which as a defenseman in the NCAA, that's not terrible. Especially given his age. And he is very much an offensive like helper. Really, really good play in transition. And likes to skate with the puck too, which is kind of aggressive, which is where he sometimes would get beat, but he could make some serious plays on it. And also does help out on in the offensive zone with his IQ. I would say his IQ is probably like above average. It isn't necessarily exciting, but it's not nothing. So I guess with Logan Hensler, the overall prospect or the overall profile on him to me is that he is a guy with upside to be a legit two-way defenseman in your bottom four. More likely, he's probably an offensive defenseman who maybe like discount Jake Wallman or something akin to that, to where the defense is going to be like good enough, and the offense is going to be good enough but slightly better. Um, I mean, yeah, maybe that's not the right comparison, but nothing else is coming to mind. But it essentially the thing about Hensler that excites me is that he showed that he was able to hang in the NCAA, which is a very challenging place to play at the University of Wisconsin, and I think that's enough for me to at least be intrigued, especially given the caliber of prospect profile around his spot. So those are some of my names that the Blues could choose if they stick and pick. So once again, you've got Ravensburgen is the top goalie, Cole Reshny, Braden Coots, two centers that if they're there, take them, please. Malcolm Spence, Jack Nesbitt, two other forwards, and then Kashawn Aitchison, Jackson Smith, Cameron Reed, Blake Fiddler, and Logan Hensler, all defensive options with differing profiles. Probably more like late second round picks in a better draft year or just second round picks. But this year they are first round caliber, or maybe not first round caliber, but they are first round projected picks, um, who all sort of do, for the most part, all of them do like one or sometimes two things above average, and the rest of their game is just kind of eh. So those are the Blues options for the draft this year. We discussed what would happen if they traded the pick for a player. We discussed what would happen if they trade back in the draft, because that could give you a chance to get maybe one of these, sort of meh, but maybe defensemen, and then sort of like a maybe center prospect. And that is a lot more value, or it's not necessarily more valuable than a higher ceiling player, but that could be, depending on how the board falls, a really prudent strategy for Doug Armstrong and Alex Steen to take. I do think with this draft, it's going to be interesting to monitor because to me, it feels like Steen is already getting a lot of say in who they draft. I mean, obviously, Stenberg and Lindstein were guys when Steen was the the European scouting director or whatever. And then last year, they take Udacek, who is a very contentious player, but European and played in a lot of international European competition. Someone that Steen might have been involved in selecting. So it kind of feels like Steen is already getting integrated into the draft selection process, and I would definitely expect that to be the case this year. So this will be something to monitor, because there's a chance that they could really hit a home run here and get two potential NHLers. That would be a home run to me. Of course, that would be very difficult, but you never know. And Doug Armstrong has as strong a draft record as any GM and is probably stronger. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please leave a like if you did. It really helps us out. It helps the YouTube algorithms tell uh, it helps tell the YouTube algorithms to share this to other Blues fans and hockey fans who are excited for NHL draft content. Subscribe if you haven't already so you can check out all of our latest stuff. We have some really cool projects in the work. I know I've been saying that for like a month now, but we sort of wanted to wait until after free agency, after the craziness of the off season. But we got some really cool stuff coming into the later months of the summer, so stay tuned for all that. And of course, we'll be here to talk Blues every week, and whenever schedules permit. This week was a little bit more crazy, but next week should be back to regularly scheduled stuff. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. This has been Note News, and as always, let's go Blues.